We got to get back to talking about offensive coordinators who have decided to stay put. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this because I think there was a thought that it was basically a done deal. The offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson from the Detroit Lions, was going to become the next head coach of the Washington Commanders. And then all of a sudden he decides to come back after their disappointing loss, beat up 24-7 to the 49ers. What was your initial impressions and what do you make of him passing up the bag, if you will, passing up that head coaching opportunity?
Wow, Brady. And the thing is, we talked about this before, like I believe last week, matter of fact, because we were saying you have to be careful when you're in a position to potentially be a head coach, right? Because you just don't know which way the pendulum is going to swing in the future. We talked about, Kellen Moore and how he was one of the hottest commodities in regards to being a head coach a few years ago. Byron Leftwich, who's not even in the NFL right now, who was one of the hottest commodities. And now you have Ben Johnson. And it's a little weird, if I'm being honest, Brady, because last year I could understand him wanting to come back. Maybe he felt like he wasn't ready to take on that role as a head coach. Maybe he wanted to mature a little bit more in regards to being a leader of men, because we know he's a great X's and O's guy in regards to calling plays for the Detroit Lions. But this year, like you said, everybody thought this was a done deal, right? We all thought the Commanders were literally waiting for Ben Johnson to finish his run with the Detroit Lions to be a head coach. So now it gets everybody asking questions, right, Brady? Like, is this a scenario? Because let's not forget, before Jim Harbaugh became available, it seemed like Ben Johnson was slated to go to the Chargers. Was this a scenario where he was like, well, I'm going to go to a place where I know there's a franchise quarterback already in place? Because we have not seen him be able to develop a young quarterback yet, because he hasn't had to do that, right? He had Jared Goff, who was already a veteran when he got to Detroit, and he kind of helped him kind of resurrect his career already. But Jared Goff had already been to a Super Bowl. So now, like, I'm asking questions like, is this a scenario where Ben Johnson didn't want to start over, even though he had a boatload of money with the Commanders to spend? He had some talent on the outside with Scary Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. I mean, I always thought, and Brady, you know this, I thought Atlanta was a better fit for him anyway, just because of the weapons they had on offense and then being able to pick a top 10 quarterback. But Washington picks even higher, right? They picked number 2 overall, I believe. So you're going to, most likely get Drake May or Jaden Daniels. To me, it's a little weird now, because he decided to do this not 1 year, but 2 years, Brady. And like we said, we just never know how the pendulum swings, what happens. And I don't foresee this happening with Detroit, because I just think the way they've got that foundation laid, I think they'll still have a really good offense next year. But you just never know, Brady. Like, what if they revert back to who they were before? Is he still going to be a top candidate next year?
Yeah, so I don't worry about that so much. That was a point Pete Prisco brought up earlier this week when we were on HQ. And one of the things I keep saying back to him is, how many failed first-time head coaches do we still see get another opportunity? Happens all the time. I mean, go back.
It took Raheem Morris like a decade, though.
In some cases, but go back and look at Matt LaFleur's stats as an offensive play caller back when I believe he was the OC for the Tennessee Titans before he got the Green Bay Packers head coaching job. I mean, it happens all the time. It's really, to me, not so much about do we worry about them falling back. I think when you see a candidate who turns down that opportunity to go somewhere, there's probably a lot of things that factor into that decision. You brought up a lot of good points. The quarterback situation. He might want that veteran quarterback. He might look and say, hey, I think Justin Herbert is a stud, is a guy. Like, he's everything there. He might have walked into some of those interviews and said, well, are you guys going to stay at 2? Because I might like Caleb Williams or Drake May. And if you guys, unless you guys move to number 1 and go to that spot so I can get that guy, maybe I don't feel as good about this position. The other thing is like, how much do we know about the new Washington ownership group? Not much.
Ooh.
Right? We know they're going to build a new stadium. That's all good. We know they have deep pockets. That's great. We don't really know much else. And that might be tough for a first-time head coach to want to then attach himself to a new owner. I think you look at the recent history of one of the newest owners, David Tepper, and how do you think Matt Rule felt after he signed a 7-year deal? Bang. After not even 3 full years. Frank Wright, 1 year, not even a full year into it. And he gets taken out and he gets clipped. And supposedly Ben Johnson was one of the candidates that David Tepper looked at last year, as well as this year too, as a potential candidate. So I think the ownership structure and group matters, and what might be better off than what you don't know, especially with a newer group or a newer owner. Personally, you hear reports that his family likes to stay up in Detroit, so maybe there's a personal element to it. It's not like he needed to go take a job because he's still under contract with the Detroit Lions. And actually, to that point, These coordinators are making bank now. If you go
look, he got a raise.
You look back 10 years ago, these guys weren't getting paid upwards of $2 to $4 million, right? That was like head coaching money top end. Now coordinators can get paid up to that amount. And so if owners are willing to pay a coordinator that much, I mean, you don't really have to be in a rush to go somewhere where your reputation gets damaged if you go take that shot and an owner moves on from you after a year or two, especially a new owner who's still trying to figure out the process of how they go about building that organization. So I can understand the patience. I think the one thing that bothers me is when I see a report from Adam Schefter that comes out and says, well, you know, apparently the amount of money he was asking for, teams were spooked by. Okay, well, throw out the number. Like how much?
Exactly.
And the reason why I asked that is for this reason. Bill Belichick probably was making as much money as anyone in the NFL for a few reasons. One, he's the most successful coach we've seen in NFL history. Two, he wore multiple hats. He was the head coach. He was the general manager. You're kind of compensating him there for both. All right. And the third reason is you want to compensate him so he's happy, so he doesn't want to go anywhere else. So there's your three reasons. Let's just say he was making 20 plus million. All right. People might say, well, that's warranted. That's justified. He's got multiple hats. He's the most successful we've seen. But why shouldn't then Ben Johnson want that? I mean, take, for example, the quarterback position. Is Patrick Mahomes not the best in the NFL? Is he always getting paid more than everyone else in the NFL? No.
True.
When the next guy comes up for his contract, he's going to surpass him. So we don't look at like, it's the market. We don't look at the Dak Prescott deal and go, well, should he be making more than Patrick Mahomes? We don't say that. We just go, well, he's next up.
A lot of people do say it, though.
Well, people may say that, but they're not saying that then when they have to go buy a gallon of gas just went up. That's the price of getting a franchise quarterback. That's what you're going to pay for it as an organization. Yeah. So the funny thing about that is then, let's just look at it this way. If you're Ben Johnson, why wouldn't you ask for what is market rate? If Bill Belichick's interviewing for jobs and he's asking for that amount, or you've interviewed other places and you're saying, hey, this is the number if you want my services. Okay, spook teams. To me, that report actually looked more damning to any team that's interviewed Ben Johnson if they were spooked by the amount he asked for them looking potentially cheap. It's like, go make the financial commitment, because if you don't make it to him, you're probably going to make it to someone else. And even if it's a little bit less, so what are you're being cheap with your head coaching hire? You're trying to get him at a discount? Like, that to me didn't resonate. And it kind of came off as a little bit as, all right, who is he speaking for? Because we all know insiders and they're usually trying to take positions to kind of speak for certain organizations. So if the number was too big, what's the number? Was it 30 million? You know, was it 20, 25? Is that too much? Like if Mike Vrabel wanted 20 million, are we saying, is that too much? I mean, Jim Harbaugh was going to get 12.5 million if he would have stayed at Michigan. And that's probably not including the incentives and escalators and things within that contract if you won more national championships at Michigan. So are we now saying, like, I mean, I don't know what he's getting paid with the Chargers. I assume it's more than 12.5 million a year. So I hate to beat a drum here on talking about this, but I kind of hated seeing that report because I'm like, come on, man, like release what information you have. Otherwise, it looks short-sighted then, does it not?
Yeah, and if you look at it right, if you know what your worth, or like we talked about, the market value is, why wouldn't you try to get top dollar? And if you're Ben Johnson and you know you're the belle of the ball, everybody wants you, why wouldn't you want to reset the market and be the next highest paid coach, right? Even if you haven't done it before. And to your point, Brady, I didn't even think about this. I thought this was an amazing point by you. With the new ownership group, you really don't know what you're going to get because there isn't a track record there, right? So if you're Ben Johnson, and like you said, if the money did spook them away, that's a little damning to the Commanders, because I want financial security to know that I'm going to be here at least 3 or 4 years. So, like, yes, this is what I'm asking for, because you're not the only person vying for my services, right? There's multiple teams that want me. And to your point, it seemed like that it almost came to a head where it seemed like it was a for sure deal that he was going to the Commanders. So I don't know what happened the last few weeks. Maybe it was a number and maybe the new ownership group didn't feel comfortable. But like you said, to me, that's more damning on them, because you essentially had an opportunity to get the top guy in the marketplace, right? And you were saying that you're willing to spend money to change things around. Why wouldn't you spend money to bring in the head coach that you want to change things around and change that culture around?
Yeah, and one thing I can promise you to that point is the number only goes up in subsequent years, right?
For sure.
So if you go find a guy that you're not wild about, but he's the guy and things don't work out after a year or two, well, you're paying him, you're paying that entire staff, then you're paying the next guy too, which that price has only gone up. So it seems a little short-sighted in my opinion.
You're being David Tepper.
Well, exactly, which again, he's the newest owner. And I think if I was any head coaching candidate, as much as you're flattered for the opportunity and you take that opportunity if you get there, I would be extremely hesitant, especially considering his track record so far and pulling the rug from out underneath head coaches.